Before we start today's tale, help the crew by stabbing the subscribe and like buttons. Your support is the wind to our sails. Gather round, mates, and listen close. You think you've heard the wildest of my tales, do you? Ghost ships, cursed storms, vengeful admirals, they're just the surface of what the seas hold. But tonight, I'll tell you of a legend so haunting, it'll send a chill through even the hardest sailor's bones. A tale of a city swallowed by shadows, glittering with riches and riddled with doom. It was in a smoky tavern in Tortuga that I first heard the whispers. The grizzled old sailor, his eye lost to time and his hand replaced with a crude iron hook, spoke of it in hushed tones. The lost city of shadows, he croaked, his voice like the creak of old timbers. A place where the sea hides its darkest secrets. They say it's cursed, Captain Morrigan. Ships that go seeking it vanish, their crews never to be seen again. But oh, the treasure's there. His one good eye gleamed, the look of a man who'd seen too much and lived to tell of it. I dismissed it as drunkards talk, a tale meant to lure fools into his games of dice. But the words lingered. A city that vanishes without a trace, leaving behind only tales of gold and despair. Months later, as the sea pearl danced across the waves, I found myself thinking of that sailor and his story. What would drive a man to speak of such a place? Madness or truth? Little did I know, fate was already setting the course. The shadows of that city were stirring, and they'd chosen me to uncover their secrets. So begins the tale of the lost city of shadows, mates. Hold tight to your courage, for the sea holds more than storms and sharks. The first whisper of destiny came not from the sea, but from an unexpected source, a map unlike any other. We were anchored in the bustling port of Kingston, the air thick with the mingling scents of salt and spice. I was nursing a tankard of rum in a dimly lit corner of a shabby tavern, when a wiry man with a patchy beard and a nervous twitch approached me. "Captain Morrigan," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the drunken shouts and raucous laughter around us. "You're the one they speak of, aye? The man who defies storms and steals from under the nose of the crown?" I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting the man squirm under my gaze. He reached into his coat and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Setting it on the table, he glanced around as though expecting the shadows themselves to strike. "I've something you'll want to see," he muttered, unwrapping the bundle with trembling hands. What lay beneath was no ordinary map. The parchment was aged and weathered, its edges frayed as though it had seen more adventures than I ever would. But it was the ink that caught my eye, gleaming faintly in the dim light, as if it had been mixed with crushed moonlight. The markings were strange, a mix of jagged coastlines, swirling patterns, and cryptic symbols I couldn't make sense of. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my tone sharp enough to cut through the haze of rum. The man flinched but held his ground. "It was my brother's," he said. "He sailed with a crew that went looking for the lost city of shadows. Only his ship never returned. Years later, this map washed ashore in a bottle, sealed tight. His name was scrawled inside. I think it's real, Captain." I studied the map, my instincts warring with reason. The markings seemed to shift, the symbols almost breathing as I looked closer. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but greed whispered louder than caution. "What do you want for it?" I asked, already knowing there was no turning back. The man hesitated, then leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "I want you to find that cursed city and lay my brother's ghost to rest. Take me with you, Captain. Let me see it for myself." I didn't trust him, not entirely, but something about the map called to me. Perhaps it was the promise of treasure, or perhaps it was a deeper, darker curiosity. Either way, I sealed the deal with a nod and a swig of rum. By the time I returned to the Sea Pearl, the map was tucked safely in my coat, and a storm was already brewing. Not in the sky, but in my gut. This map was more than just a guide. It was a summons, a calling to a place no sane sailor would dare tread. As the crew gathered around, their eyes glinting with a mix of greed and unease, I unfurled the map on the deck. "We sail at first light," I declared, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. Little did I know, the journey ahead would not only test our courage, but our very souls. The lost city of shadows was waiting, and it would not let us leave unchanged. With the first light of dawn, the Sea Pearl cut through the harbor waters, leaving the familiar chaos of Kingston behind. The crew, though seasoned and loyal, were unusually quiet. The map had sparked whispers among them. Tales of cursed cities and ghostly guardians were traded in hushed tones. I stood at the helm, the mysterious map spread before me. It was no ordinary chart, and following its cryptic markings required more intuition than navigation. It led us through uncharted waters, where the sea stretched endlessly, its surface gleaming like polished obsidian under the sun. "Captain, this map of yours," said Rowan, my first mate, as he approached, his brow furrowed. "It's not natural. It's as if it knows where we are, guiding us like it's alive." I couldn't disagree. Each time I consulted the map, the ink seemed to shift, marking new paths as if sensing our progress. It was both a blessing and a curse, for with each new revelation came a deeper sense of unease. The crew's unease grew as the days passed. The waters grew darker, the skies heavier. A peculiar stillness enveloped the ship, broken only by the creak of the timbers and the rhythmic slap of the waves against the hull. On the fifth day, we encountered the first of the map's riddles. The parchment depicted a jagged arch of rock rising from the sea, a warning scrawled in ancient script beneath it. "To pass is to offer." "There!" shouted the lookout, his voice slicing through the silence. He pointed to the horizon, where the silhouette of the arch rose against the sky, just as the map had shown. I called the crew to attention. "Bring me the offering," I ordered, though I had no clear idea what it should be. The map was vague, its riddles open to interpretation. Rowan approached with a small chest of gold coins and trinkets, taken from our last raid. "Gold speaks to the sea," he said. The chest was lowered into the waves, and for a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the waters beneath the arch began to churn, as if the sea itself were alive. The ship groaned, the current pulling us forward. As we passed under the arch, a strange hum resonated through the air, setting our teeth on edge. The shadows seemed to deepen, the sunlight fading as though swallowed by an unseen force. When we emerged, the world had changed. The waters were darker, their surface like liquid glass. The horizon was obscured by a dense, unnatural mist that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. The map now displayed an island that hadn't been there before, a jagged mass of land with towering cliffs and shadowed valleys. The crew muttered nervously, but I silenced them with a look. "Steel yourselves," I commanded. "This is what we came for." As we sailed closer to the island, the air grew colder, the wind carrying with it a faint, mournful wail. It sounded almost human, yet impossibly distant. The map's ink began to fade, the symbols dimming as if surrendering to the island's shadow. "This place isn't on any chart," Rowan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like it's been waiting for us." "Then let's not keep it waiting," I replied, though my confidence felt as fragile as the ship beneath my feet. The crew readied themselves for landfall, their movements mechanical, their faces pale. Even the bravest among them could feel it. The island was alive, watching us, waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. And so, with hearts heavy and spirits tense, we anchored near the shore, the jagged cliffs looming like the teeth of some great slumbering beast. The lost city of shadows was near. But at what cost? The island loomed before us, an imposing fortress of jagged cliffs and dense jungle. As we rowed ashore, the silence was unlike anything I'd ever known, thick, oppressive, and unnatural. Even the cries of gulls and the rush of waves seemed muted, as if the island itself absorbed all sound. The crew disembarked cautiously, weapons drawn and eyes darting to every shadow. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and salt, but beneath it lingered something foul, like decay hidden beneath layers of life. "Captain," Rowan murmured as he scanned the tree line, "there's something wrong with this place. Feels like it's watching us." I nodded, but said nothing. I felt it too. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down on us, and the forest ahead seemed alive with whispers, just beyond the range of hearing. The map was nearly useless now, its ink faded to faint smudges, yet it still pulsed faintly when I held it, drawing me forward like a magnet. "We move inland," I ordered, keeping my voice steady. "Stay together and stay sharp." The jungle swallowed us quickly, its canopy blotting out the sun and casting the world in a perpetual twilight. The path was overgrown, vines and roots twisting like fingers reaching for our feet. Every few steps, one of the crew would stop, claiming they heard something, a rustle, a voice, or a faint laugh carried on the wind. It was Keen, our gunner, who found the first true sign of the city. "Here," he called, kneeling near a cluster of rock. Carved into the stones were strange symbols, etched deep and worn by time. They glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to sync with the pounding of my heart. "What do they mean?" Rowan asked, running his fingers over the grooves. "I don't know," I admitted, "but they're guiding us. Keep moving." The deeper we went, the stranger the forest became. The trees twisted unnaturally, their trunks spiraling upward like smoke frozen in time. The ground was littered with bones, not of animals, but of creatures unrecognizable, their shapes too bizarre to name. Then came the voices. At first they were faint, indistinct whispers carried on the breeze, but as we pressed on, they grew louder, forming words in languages none of us recognized. They didn't come from any single direction. Instead, they seemed to emanate from the very air around us. "Captain," Rowan said, his voice tight with fear, "this isn't natural." "No, it isn't," I agreed, gripping the hilt of my sword. "But we didn't come here for natural." The path opened into a clearing, and there, half buried in the earth, was a stone obelisk. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the rocks we'd seen earlier. At its base was a small pool of water, black as ink and perfectly still. "What is this place?" Keen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "A warning," I replied, though I wasn't sure how I knew. As I stepped closer to the obelisk, the whispers grew deafening, rising into a cacophony of sound. I placed my hand on the cold, slick surface of the stone, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Images flooded my mind, flashes of a grand city, its spires reaching toward the heavens, its streets alive with people. Then came fire and shadows, consuming everything, leaving only ruins and echoes. I pulled my hand away, gasping for breath as the visions faded. The crew stared at me, their faces pale. "What did you see?" Rowan asked. "A city," I said, my voice shaking. "A city lost to time, destroyed by something that still lingers here." The obelisk let out a low hum, and the pool at its base began to ripple. From its depths rose a faint light, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. "We should leave," Keen urged, his eyes wide with fear. "No," I said firmly. "We're close. The city is real, and it's waiting for us. We've come too far to turn back now." But as we pressed on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the island was testing us, gauging our resolve. And I couldn't help but wonder, if we found the city, would it welcome us as explorers or punish us as trespassers? The morning came shrouded in an unnatural fog, thick and suffocating. It wasn't the kind of mist that rolled off the sea at dawn. This fog carried weight, pressing down on us, wrapping around our limbs as if alive. The jungle around us, already menacing, was now a labyrinth of shadows and half-seen shapes. "Stay close," I ordered, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "The last thing we need is to lose anyone in this cursed mist." Rowan nodded, his eyes scanning the surroundings warily. "It's like the island doesn't want us here," he muttered, his hand never straying far from the pistol at his belt. We pushed forward, the faint glow of the map guiding us, The symbols etched into its surface pulsed faintly, casting an eerie light that barely pierced the fog. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground beneath us sought to drag us down. It was Keen who first noticed the shapes. "Captain," he hissed, pointing to the trees. At the edge of my vision, shadows moved. They flitted between the trunks, too quick and fleeting to be fully seen. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as we pressed on, the shapes grew bolder, lingering just long enough for their forms to take shape. They looked human, almost. Their features were distorted, their limbs too long, their faces obscured by the fog. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if they were marionettes guided by unseen strings. "Are they following us?" Rowan whispered, his voice barely audible. "No," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "They're hurting us." The realization sent a chill down my spine. The shapes weren't just observing, they were guiding us, subtly steering our path deeper into the island. The fog grew thicker until even the person ahead of me was little more than a silhouette. The ground turned treacherous, with roots and rocks hidden beneath the mist, tripping us up at every turn. Then we heard it, a low, mournful wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was a sound that chilled the blood, a sound that spoke of despair and loss. "What is that?" Keen asked, his voice shaking. "Not something we want to meet," I replied. "Keep moving." But the wail grew louder, more insistent. It was joined by whispers, faint at first, but soon a chorus of voices filled the air, each one overlapping the next, until they were an unintelligible roar. We stumbled into a clearing, and the fog seemed to retreat slightly, revealing a strange sight. In the center of the clearing stood a stone archway, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the obelisk we had encountered earlier. Beyond the archway, the fog swirled unnaturally, forming a tunnel of sorts that led deeper into the jungle. "This is it," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. "This is the way to the city." Rowan looked at me, his face pale. "Captain, this feels like a trap." "Of course it's a trap," I replied with a wry smile, "but it's the only way forward." The crew hesitated, their fear palpable. But they followed me as I stepped through the archway, the fog closing in around us once more. As we passed through, the whispers grew louder and the air grew colder. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes, watching, judging. The map in my hand burned hot, its glow pulsing wildly as if in warning. We were no longer just explorers. We were intruders in a realm that was not meant for the living. And as the fog thickened once more, swallowing us whole, I couldn't help but wonder if we would ever find our way back. When the fog finally broke, it was as if we had stepped into another world. The oppressive grayness dissipated, revealing a sky painted in hues of eerie green and gold, as though the sun here was not our own. The jungle gave way to an expansive clearing, and there, rising before us, was the city. It was magnificent, an impossible fusion of beauty and foreboding. Towers of smooth black stone spiraled into the sky, their surfaces carved with intricate symbols that shimmered faintly, like they breathed with life. Massive bridges stretched across canals of glowing water, their spans too perfect to have been crafted by human hands. "It's real," Rowan breathed, his voice heavy with awe and disbelief. The stories were true. A deep sense of wonder filled me as I took in the sight. The city was like nothing I'd ever seen, a masterpiece born of an age long forgotten. But the feeling of triumph was short-lived. The air here was heavy, charged with a strange energy that prickled at the skin. This was no ordinary place. "Stay sharp," I said, scanning the area. "This city has secrets, and secrets don't stay buried without reason." As we cautiously entered the city, the silence was deafening. No birds, no rustling of leaves, just the sound of our boots on the stone streets. Every step echoed, the sound swallowed quickly by the oppressive quiet. The streets were lined with statues, tall and imposing, their eyes seemingly watching our every move. Each figure held a unique expression: anguish, defiance, reverence. They were not crafted in homage. They felt like warnings. "Captain," Keen called out, his voice tense. "Look at the ground." I followed his gaze. The streets were not merely stone. They were carved with intricate patterns, glowing faintly underfoot. They pulsed like veins leading deeper into the heart of the city. "This place, it's alive," Rowan said, his voice barely above a whisper. We pressed on, drawn by the map's glow, which grew brighter with each step. It led us to a vast courtyard, dominated by an enormous structure at its center, a pyramid of black stone that seemed to drink in the light. At its apex was an orb of glowing energy, suspended in midair, pulsating like a heartbeat. "That must be it," I said, my voice low. "The heart of the city." The crew gathered around me, their faces a mixture of awe and dread. The air here was thick with power, and I could feel it thrumming in my chest. But as we approached, a deep rumble echoed through the city. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and a low, resonant hum filled the air. The symbols on the pyramid began to glow brighter, and the orb at its peak pulsed violently. "What's happening?" Keen shouted, drawing his weapon. The answer came in the form of a figure, emerging from the shadows at the base of the pyramid. It was tall, draped in tattered robes that seemed to shift and ripple like smoke. Its face was obscured by a mask, crafted from the same black stone as the city. "You dare trespass," the figure said, its voice echoing unnaturally, as though spoken by many. The crew froze, their weapons at the ready. I stepped forward, forcing calm into my voice. "We mean no harm. We seek knowledge of this place, nothing more." The figure tilted its head as if considering my words. "Knowledge comes at a price," it said, raising a skeletal hand. The symbols on the pyramid flared, and the hum grew louder. The city was alive, and we had awoken it. The figure descended the steps of the pyramid with a grace that seemed unnatural, its robes billowing as though moved by an invisible wind. The mask gleamed ominously in the strange light, its carved surface void of expression. Yet the weight of its gaze, if it could see us, was palpable. "Leave this place," the figure commanded, its voice a haunting melody of tones, some human, some not. "Turn back before the city claims you." I squared my shoulders, keeping my hand on the hilt of my blade. "We cannot leave," I said, my voice steady despite the unease coursing through me. "The map brought us here. We seek the heart of the city and the knowledge it guards." The figure paused, as if considering my words. Then it raised a hand, pointing a long bony finger at the crew. "The heart of the city is not a prize. It is a curse," it intoned. "Those who seek it are weighed, judged, and seldom leave unscathed." Behind me, Keen shifted nervously, his knuckles white as they gripped his sword. Rowan's eyes darted between me and the Guardian, his expression betraying his growing doubt. "We are prepared to face whatever trials lie ahead," I said firmly. The Guardian tilted its head, the mask catching the ethereal glow of the city. "Bravery alone will not suffice, Captain Morrigan," it said, my name sounding strange on its lips. "This city feeds on the unworthy, and its price is paid in more than blood. What you desire comes with a burden you may not bear." The crew murmured uneasily behind me, their courage faltering in the face of the figure's ominous words. I raised a hand to silence them, stepping forward. "I understand the risk," I replied, my voice resolute. "But we came seeking the truth, and I will not turn back now." The Guardian's presence seemed to grow heavier, the air thickening around us. "So be it," it said, lowering its hand. "The trials will judge your resolve. If you survive, you may claim the heart. But know this, the city remembers those who trespass, and it never forgets." The ground beneath us trembled, and the glowing symbols across the city began to pulse rhythmically, like the beating of a great heart. The Guardian stepped aside, gesturing toward the pyramid. "The first trial awaits within," it said. "Prove yourself or perish." As the Guardian faded into the shadows, a heavy silence fell over the crew. Their faces reflected the same mix of fear and determination I felt in my own heart. I turned to them, meeting each of their gazes in turn. We've come this far, I said. Whatever lies ahead, we face it together. The crew nodded, their resolve hardening once more. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, leading them toward the pyramid. The doors of black stone groaned open as we approached, revealing a yawning darkness within. The city had made its challenge clear, and there was no turning back now. The air inside the pyramid was heavy, a mix of musty age and a strange metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. As we descended deeper into the bowels of the structure, the walls began to shimmer faintly, casting ghostly reflections of the crew in the flickering light of our torches. It was Keen who saw it first. "Captain," he murmured, stopping abruptly. His torchlight caught something in the gloom, a glint of gold. We turned the corner to find ourselves in a cavernous chamber, the walls encrusted with intricate carvings and inlaid jewels. At the center stood a massive pile of gold coins, shimmering artifacts and gemstones that seemed to pulse with an unnatural glow. The sight was almost overwhelming, the wealth on display enough to buy entire kingdoms. "By the gods," Rowan whispered, stepping forward as if in a trance. His hand reached out toward a golden chalice, its surface studded with rubies. "Stop!" I barked, my voice snapping him out of his daze. He turned to me, his face flushed with shame and greed. "Captain, do you see this? We'd be fools not to take it. Imagine what this could mean for us, for the sea pearl." "Aye, it's a fortune," I said, my tone measured. "But does it not strike you as strange that such wealth would be left unguarded?" Keen frowned, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "It's a trap," he muttered, stepping back. "It has to be." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the allure of the treasure warring with the warnings we'd already received. The room seemed to hum faintly, as if the gold itself was alive, whispering promises of power and glory to those who dared to claim it. I moved closer, inspecting the treasure without touching it. The carvings on the walls depicted scenes of chaos. Men and women clutching at gold with wild eyes, only to be consumed by shadows that rose up from the ground. "It's a test," I said, the realization settling over me like a weight. The city offers temptation to see who will fall prey to greed. Those who take the gold may seal their fate. Rowan hesitated, his hand hovering over the chalice. "But what if it's just gold?" he said, his voice tinged with desperation. "What if we leave it behind for nothing?" I stepped in front of him, meeting his gaze with a steely glare. "Then we'll leave with our lives intact. No treasure is worth the risk of damnation." The room seemed to darken as if the shadows disapproved of my words. The hum grew louder, a low, insidious vibration that rattled the very air. "Everyone, stay back," I ordered. "No one touches the gold." The crew obeyed, albeit reluctantly, their faces a mixture of longing and fear. As we made to leave the chamber, the gold seemed to shimmer brighter, and the hum grew into a low, guttural whisper. "Take it," the voice hissed, echoing around us. "It is yours, yours to claim." I ignored it, gripping the hilt of my sword as we pressed forward. The shadows on the walls writhed, forming twisted shapes that reached out toward us, their dark tendrils bristling with malice. "Keep moving," I shouted, herding the crew out of the chamber. The moment we crossed the threshold, the hum ceased, and the air grew still. The gold was left behind, untouched, though its promise still lingered in the minds of the crew. As we ventured deeper into the pyramid, I couldn't help but wonder how many before us had failed this trial, how many had succumbed to the temptation of gold and never emerged. The city was testing us, peeling back the layers of our humanity. And I feared the trials to come would demand even more. Time is an unforgiving mistress, and in that cursed city, it seemed to bend and twist like the shadows that haunted its halls. As we pressed deeper into the labyrinthine passages of the pyramid, the air grew colder, biting at our skin. The golden treasure and its promises were behind us now, but the weight of the Guardian's warning pressed heavily upon my mind. "You have until the sands run dry," he had said. I glanced at the ancient hourglass he had thrust into my hands, a strange relic filled with fine black sand that trickled steadily downward. "We don't know how much time we have left," Keen muttered, his eyes darting toward the glass. "And these halls are endless." "Then we make no wrong turns," I replied, though the weight of my words carried more conviction than I felt. The pyramid seemed alive, shifting subtly, its walls narrowing and widening as if guiding or trapping us. Every corridor was a gamble, every choice fraught with the possibility of doom. The hourglass was our only guide, yet it offered no answers, only the relentless flow of sand slipping away like water through our fingers. We turned a corner and entered a chamber bathed in an eerie, shifting light. The walls were covered in intricate murals that seemed to move, depicting scenes of desperate explorers racing against shadows that consumed them. "What is this place?" Rowan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "A warning," I said, my eyes scanning the room. The murals told a story, one I could almost hear whispered in the back of my mind. The shadows were alive, and those who lingered too long would be swallowed whole. "Captain, look!" one of the crew shouted. In the center of the room stood a massive stone door, its surface carved with ancient symbols. It bore no handle, no visible means of entry, only a riddle etched into the stone. "Through wit and courage, you shall pass, but squander your moments, and this breath's your last." The sand in the hourglass seemed to flow faster, its trickle relentless. "It's another test," I muttered, stepping closer. "Keen, translate the symbols, quickly." The man knelt, tracing the carvings with his fingers. "They tell of a key, Captain, but it's not a key made of metal. It's knowledge. We must answer its riddle to open the door." "Then we don't have time to waste," I said, my mind racing. The riddles swirled in my thoughts. The room itself seemed to breathe, shadows creeping ever closer, whispering threats in a language I couldn't understand. My crew fidgeted, the pressure mounting as the black sand slipped further away. "Focus," I barked. "We won't make it by panicking. Think." Rowan, his brow furrowed, suddenly stepped forward. "Captain, the murals, they show a pattern. Light banishes the shadows. Perhaps the answer is courage in the face of darkness?" I nodded, piecing it together. The city had tested our greed, our resolve. Now it tested our ability to remain steady under pressure. Keen stepped to the door, pressing his palm against the carvings. "What if we confront the shadows, Captain? Show we're not afraid?" "Do it," I commanded, my hand resting on my blade in case the pyramid had other plans. Keen spoke aloud, his voice steady. "The answer is light in the dark, courage and fear." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the carvings began to glow, and the door groaned, sliding open with an otherworldly rumble. Behind us, the shadows screamed, a deafening wail of anger as the light from the open door drove them back. The sand in the hourglass slowed, though it did not stop. We pressed on, the door sealing behind us, with a finality that left no room for second guesses. The race against time continued, but for the first time, a glimmer of hope burned in the dark. We emerged into a vast, cavernous chamber at the heart of the lost city. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, as if the very world held its breath. Before us lay the source of the city's power, a massive obelisk of obsidian, etched with glowing runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. The sands in the hourglass now fell faster, as if drawn to the obelisk's dark energy. The guardian's words echoed in my mind. "There is always a price." Keen approached the obelisk cautiously, his eyes wide with awe and fear. This is the heart of the city, the energy that keeps it hidden, that bends the world around it. "And the thing that keeps it cursed," I replied. "We destroy it, and the city will collapse. But if we don't—" Rowan finished the thought grimly. "If we don't, we'll never leave." The shadows that had pursued us earlier began to gather at the edges of the chamber, their forms growing denser, hungrier. The time for indecision had passed. "We'll need explosives," I said, already pulling supplies from my pack. Keen shook his head. It won't be enough. Look at it. It's ancient, protected by more than just stone. Something more is required. Before I could respond, the shadows surged forward, testing our resolve. I drew my blade, rallying the crew. Hold them back. We need time. The crew formed a defensive line, fighting off the shadowy figures with every ounce of strength they had left. Each strike of their blades bought precious seconds, but the shadows grew bolder, pressing closer to the obelisk. As I fought, I noticed something. Each strike of the shadows drew closer to Keen. His eyes were fixed on the obelisk, his expression one of dawning understanding and grim determination. "It wants a life," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unsettling certainty. "What are you saying, Keen?" I demanded, slashing at a shadow as it lunged for me. "This city wasn't just built on gold, Captain. It was built on sacrifice. That's why the Guardian warned us. It doesn't just take power to destroy the obelisk. It takes a soul." "No," I snapped. "There has to be another way." Keen looked at me, his expression soft but resolute. "Captain, you know there isn't. The hourglass is nearly empty, and the shadows won't stop until they consume us all. If I don't do this, none of us will leave this place alive." "I won't allow it," I growled. "You've allowed worse," Keen replied with a wry smile. "You'll allow this. I've had my share of life, Captain. Let me do this for the crew, for you." Before I could stop him, Keen sprinted toward the obelisk. The shadows screamed, recoiling as if they sensed what was coming. The crew shouted, but no one moved to stop him. Keen reached the obelisk, placing his hands on its surface. The glowing runes flared to life, and a deep, resonant hum filled the chamber. The shadows writhed and shrieked, their forms dissolving into mist as the obelisk began to fracture. With one final burst of light, the obelisk shattered, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The city trembled violently, its walls and foundations crumbling. "Run!" I shouted, my voice barely audible over the deafening roar. We fled through collapsing corridors, the sands of the hourglass now pouring out like a river. The city itself seemed to mourn its destruction, the shadows crying out in a final, desperate wail. As we emerged from the pyramid, the ground beneath us shook violently. The golden city, once a beacon of greed and power, sank into the earth, swallowed by the jungle and the curse that had claimed it. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, the crew looked around, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Keen was gone, but his sacrifice had saved us all. I turned the hourglass over in my hands, now empty of sand, a grim reminder of the cost of our survival. "He was the bravest of us," I said softly, my voice carrying the weight of grief. The jungle around us was silent, as if even nature mourned the loss. We had escaped the cursed city, but its memory would haunt me forever. Keen's sacrifice was a reminder of the fine line between ambition and ruin, and the price we pay for walking it. I glanced at my crew, weary but alive. "Let's go home," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Keen wouldn't want us lingering here. We turned toward the horizon, the shadows of the lost city fading into legend behind us. There are tales whispered among sailors that make even the boldest of us hesitate. Stories of cities swallowed by the jungle, where gold glimmers like fireflies in the dark and curses coil like vines around the unwary. I'd dismissed most of them as tavern talk, fantasies spun by men who'd seen more rum than adventure. But some tales cling to the wind, persistent as a ghost's wail. This one found me in a dimly lit port, where the jungle loomed like a beast ready to pounce. The map was thrust into my hands by a dying man, his fingers trembling as though they carried the weight of his misdeeds. His words were a riddle soaked in blood and regret. "Find it," he rasped, his eyes wide with terror. "Find the city, Captain Morrigan. But beware, the price is steep, and not all who seek it return." He didn't live to see the dawn. The map was old, its edges frayed and its ink faded, but its promise was undeniable. It spoke of a city deep in the jungle, a place of unthinkable riches. I'd heard of such places before, El Dorado, the city of Z, but this was different. This was something darker, shrouded not just in myth, but in warning. My crew was divided. Some saw the map as a golden opportunity, the kind of find that could set us all up for life. Others whispered of curses, of shadows that devour the greedy and leave nothing behind. I was torn, but the sea has a way of making choices for you, and this time it pushed us toward the unknown. The jungle called to me, its voice a low, persistent hum that thrummed in my chest. It spoke of danger, of glory, of an adventure that would test the limits of our courage and our greed. I didn't know it then, but stepping into that jungle was like stepping into a trap, a snare woven of gold and shadows. And once you're caught, there's no going back. This is the tale of the lost city, of the treasure it promised, and of the price we paid to find it. And if you're wise, you'll listen to what I've learned, for some paths are better left untraveled. But if you're like me, hungry for answers, for glory, then follow me into the jungle. Let me show you the cost of chasing a dream.